state tests. And so in order to prepare for those, it would be my encouragement to you that you start this. You start your preparations as soon as, now is not too early. So I'm putting in chat a link to the practice test. All right, it's through the state and it's awesome. It looks just like it will look on the test day. A passing grade. So your Ohio graduation tests look a little different. And that means you can score between 1 point and 5 points on each test. All right? 5 is the highest, 1 being the lowest. And you're going to gain those points, and you need a cumulative score of all of them. So you'll have like some math tests, you'll have some history tests and government tests, you'll have biology, you'll have English 1 and English 2. I'm trying to think. I know there's a government, there's a history, there's biology, there's a couple maths, I think algebra and geometry. All right. So we don't need to talk about all those, but really it just allows for your strengths. So if you're really good at science, but you're not so good at English, let's aim for like a 5 on your science. Then you can afford to not score as well on your English, right? And still get an overall cumulative score that you need to graduate. Okay. You know what? You can worry. I know my daughter took the 3rd grade state test this fall and does it again this spring. And I understand that it is stressful. This is Mrs. Rittenhouse being practical with you. Every time you stress, instead of stressing, do something about it. Okay. So take that link that I just put in chat and bookmark it as one of your favorites. I'm going to be sending out a video and a chart. The video will show you how to take these practice tests, and the chart will be like, this is like you can record your score. It's just a guest session.
Yep. And all of the things for the year thing is also in the course. Right?
Yes, I have review content in the classroom. But these tests will help you answer questions that are very similar to what you'll see on the test. And it looks the format, like it helps you visually prep for what this test will look like because it's the exact same system.
And it's also this end of year test is considered a grade for all classes.
Actually, for us, for me in biology, I make that your final exam.
It's all for us for that final exam?
Yes, so if you show up to take that, I count it as your final exam.
If we don't show up for it, what will happen?
You still have to take the final exam in my class.
So, how many points is for this final exam thing?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
So
but you want to show up and take that state test because it's mandatory. But I just say if you work really hard on that test, I'm not going to make you work really hard on another final exam. I'm going to count that for you.
If I also have a web exam on the February 26th for my game design.
Yep.
For instance, if AAU students have the February 26th thing listed for your web exam, raise your hand.
Okay. So Jonathan, we're gonna pivot, but it sounds like you are on top of your schedule. But we are gonna head back into biology instead of, and then we'll talk about that a little bit more. I promise. So what I'm gonna do again, put that in there. Everybody, go ahead and save that link that I just put in chat to your bookmarks. And if you do this, I will also give you extra credit. If you fill out that little chart, I'm going to email it to you today. It's like you trying to beat your score every time. There's a quiz in our classroom today, yes. Yeah, Paul, you'll use a guest session, guest user, guest session when you log in. It should be open. I don't know. I'll peek on that after class. So yes, anyway, know that is there. That is it. The more you start doing those practice tests right now, the stronger you're going to feel going into those tests. And I guarantee you, the better you're going to be. So who would like to read for me today? All right, so let's do. We've got lots of volunteers, and I've got another page to read next. Let's have Cheyenne, you want to read the first two, and then Jonathan, you can take the second or this third, and then Lily, I'll have you read on our next page. Awesome.
You wanted me to read the first one, right?
Yes, the first two little questions right here, if you take those.
All right. Yeah, I can. What is a species? What is a speciation?
Good. Speciation, that's a hard word. And Jonathan, you can read this guy right here.
What are some examples of how population become isolated from one another? And also,
Good.
if you want to talk about the testing later, you kind of feel like.
Yep, we can talk about testing later after class. Perfect. So we're back down here under knowledge, talking about species and speciation. Yes, good job to all of our readers. So let's read this again. What are some examples of how populations become isolated from one another? What do you guys think? All right, we talked about a population being a group of one species. So let's pretend they're the bunnies in my backyard. What is an example of how they would get isolated from one another? What could happen? Little bunny foo-foo. Yes, predators. One second. Natural disaster, getting stuck, earthquake, death, being far away. I like all these ideas. Good. Hibernation. I like that. Extended hibernation. Like they sleep in too long and their family got and left them there. That's good. We're just kind of getting our brains warmed up. So, Lily, will you read us about what is speciation? Like, what in the world when we say we know what a species is, right? It's a family of animals that are all the same, but let's learn a little bit more about what that is. Can you read this page for us?
Speciation, the formation of new species. Species, the largest group of organisms capable of interbreeding and producing viable or living fertile offspring. As new species evolve, populations become reproductively isolated. Thank you.
Yes. So, what they're saying is there is a group of organisms that are capable of interbreeding. All this means is that they are able to reproduce. All right. They are able to reproduce. That means they're of you're of the same species when you can breed with that species. A good example would be dogs, right? We have lots of different types of dogs. Let's take the poodle and the golden retriever. All right, they are both dogs. And however, what happens when a golden retriever, purebred, mates with a poodle? Yeah. Have you ever heard of a golden doodle? Turtle poodle. A golden doodle. You get a golden doodle, right? Now, they were two purebred species to start with. But because they are both canine, they are both dog, they are capable of interbreeding. Does that make sense? Yeah, a labradoodle. Yeah, those are all examples of like interbreeding, right? They all used to be like purebreds, but then not only naturally did they interbreed, but selectively by humans, we interbreed them, and they are able to do that, right? So if I took a golden retriever and my cat, would they be able to do that same thing? No, right? Because they're not of the same species. They're not of the same species. We've got a feline and a canine, and they can't interbreed. Not the same. All right, nature has a way of being very particular, right? Nature is not, it allows for random and diversity, but nature is selective and of order. So, right, it's not so chaotic that you can interbreed like that. Paul, I'll help you with that. I'm sorry. I'm not ignoring you. If you see a Siamese cat, it's almost likely a female. Yes, I've heard about that. It's probably that X and Y linked trait, right? Where it is determined by an X or Y chromosome. That's awesome. So I love this too because it also makes sense. This is relevant to our lives. Like we have people in our lives that have labradoodles or golden doodles or different. I mean, there's a bajillion intermixed species, especially of dogs, right? I feel like that has been the one that really takes big leaps and bounds of where humanity has kind of influenced the breeding, right? Whereas, think about cats. Miley, you want to go grab a cat for me?
Yeah, sure.
I'll show you my cat. Whereas cats are a lot different. You know what I mean? Cats, because they're a little more wild and a little less domesticated than dogs, we have a lot more, like, we don't say, oh, my cat. I mean, you can. I'm sure there are some fancy cats that have been intentionally bred to be specific. Come here, Maverick. This is Maverick. All right. Show him off. Show yourself off, sir. Show everybody who you are. Yeah. See, he's a little bit of white, a little bit of like a caramely butterscotch orange. You're very handsome. Show him how handsome you are. Right? This guy is no purebred anything. If he was a dog, we'd call him a mutt. Oh, we would call you a mutt. Right? And a mutt just means that it's an intermixed of so many breeds, you probably could never figure it out. But you're equally as handsome. You don't need to be purebred to be a handsome kitty, huh? Say hello. He is very soft. He's very short-haired, but he is very soft. Miley, you want to go get his brother? Here, take him. Swap him out. I'm going to show you his brother. All right? And this is also going to tell you a little bit more about his parents, his genetics. All right, so there was Maverick. He was I know, when we went to adopt a new cat, there were 2 left. And the lady said, "Oh, I can't give away one. I have to give away them together because they're brothers. And I just can't separate them." So this big softy came home with 2 kittens. All right. But Maple, his brother, is going to show you a little bit more about his parents. This is Maple. What do we notice about a similarity about Maple and Maverick? What makes them similar?
They are all the same colors.
Yeah, they both are like white and orange. You're right. But what is different? I mean, look at this guy. Whoop, look at this belly.
He is furry.
He is such a fluffy little guy. Aren't you fluffy? In fact, we thought we just were sure you were a girl. You just look so beautiful. But we keep calling you handsome, huh? Yes. You can. So he is a sweet little guy. But we also know that the genes that mom and dad, that somebody had to have an allele in their DNA for what? Calico and long fur. Yeah, long hair, and Mavericks is super short. Super, super short. But I've actually never felt a cat that had such short fur, but it was still like silky smooth. So the textures of their fur are very different. He's like, "What is happening? What's going on?" All right, go back with Mila. All right. So Maple and Maverick are example of that interbreeding, right? Cats, there are a lot of cats that run wild. And because there are a lot of cats that run wild, there's a lot of interbreeding. And so there's a lot more, I would say, variety, genetic variety unintentionally. All right. Oh, yes. My cats are pretty snuggly too. Can't help but just love on those little fuzzy guys. All right, so those are examples. What happens is, let's talk about the band of brothers, right? If Maverick and Maple would have let's say there's a natural disaster, and there's a creek that flows through our backyard, and cats hate water, and that creek flooded and got bigger, and the cats got separated. All right, we're going to pretend on one side of that creek there's very few other felines. It goes kind of back to what story, guys? What surf? Yes, we're back to redfish, greenfish all over again, right? Because if they got separated and there were less mates on the other side, then Maple's all of a sudden got to be more particular about who he chooses to be his mate, right? And if there's only maybe one other cat over there or a couple other cats over there, what it's going to do is it's going to start making that gene pool smaller and smaller and smaller. And sometimes there is a process of which what we call speciation, where actually a new form of a species is created, like a golden doodle, right? Because there is a limited, or their choice of mate is manipulated. Let's look at this. All right, so there are different ways to become a new species. All right, you have first the geographic isolation. What do you think of when you think of the word geo? This is word dissection. Weirdly. Good. Yes, yes, yes. World. Perfect. That's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the world. When geographic isolation, it means that they get isolated by the world. All right. There's something that happens and it gets isolated. The next thing that happens is what we call the ecological race. All right. The population starts to become different. Redfish, greenfish, right? They get separated into a new pond. The redfish doesn't blend in as well, and it dies, and we have that ecological race where it's like that green fish is favored because it has more camouflage, right? So that starts to happen. The ecology, the survival of the fittest starts to happen in a more specific, a smaller setting because of that isolation. And then because of that, we get the divergence, right? We get genetic alleles. So we could go as far as to say there was only 5 greenfish in the first pond, right? There was 5 greenfish in this pond of, like, let's say 2,000 redfish. But somebody went fishing one day and they caught 1 greenfish and 1 redfish. And they took them home to show their mom and dad, and their mom and dad said, "Those are cool, but you need to go out and release them." So instead of releasing them back in the same pond, there was a small pool in the backyard or a small creek or something. And so they threw the fish into a new environment. All right. And now all of a sudden, the redfish and greenfish, they're in a new environment. They don't have a lot of other fish to choose from. And really, all the fish are like, "Who's this green guy? We've never seen anybody like you." Yep. And then it's death to the redfish because the redfish sticks out. And then all of a sudden, the greenfish starts making this upcoming, right? Where it's like, actually, that color works better. The predators don't see us when you're green. That's my mate. I want my babies to be green, right? And then we start getting more greenfish. And all of a sudden, there were never greenfish before. But because that was favored, we get a new variety of species. Now, did Mrs. Rittenhouse said we get a whole new fish that looks dramatically different? No. But do you see how we have a new trait of an existing species? That has changed over time. Okay? That's speciation. That there's a difference. Okay? That is what I'm talking about, is how things are separated. They work better. And so nature favors them. And then all of a sudden, we have an upcoming new mutation that was favored. Oh, yes. I love it when things I say help. I'm glad that helps, Draven. Good. Let's look at this example. All right, this is the geographic isolation in a picture. All right, this is redfish, greenfish, and snails. So what if the red mated with the green, Sally? It would either be, the babies could be some red, some green, or if it was a, we talked about those traits. Remember about those traits? That sometimes they mix and sometimes they don't. It's not a mixing. They have one or the other. Remember our flowers? Does anybody remember those? Independent or incomplete? Yep, incomplete and codominance. Incomplete means that it would be a red fish and a green fish, and if those colors blended together, they would be brown. I'm guessing that wouldn't be the case. I would say it's probably a codominant situation where they either had all red babies, all green babies, or some red and green. Does that make sense? And then the red continued to get eaten because they were red, and the green survived and kept reproducing. Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Ollie. So this is another example. This is pre-earthquake, right? We've got this little selection of snails. And then all of a sudden there's an earthquake and this population gets divided, right? All of a sudden there are adaptations that are favored towards a brown shell versus a more lime green shell on this side. And then you end up with a new species. Yeah, yep. Good job. Yes, thank you, Luna, for explaining that. Perfect. So this would be like a pictorial example, like another example of redfish, greenfish. This is our snail version, right? Again, and it says different niches. Does anybody know what a niche is or a niche? It just means a job, a role. Yep, it's different, right? So what's happening on both sides of this is there's still snails in their ecosystem, but because of that divide, because they got separated from their brown-shelled friends or their once more green-shelled friends, they started adapting to what life was like on this side of the divide. Nature started choosing which worked better, and that adaptation was favored and selected, and eventually that green shell was weeded out of the population. Same thing with this. They were green shelled over here. It wasn't working. There was a mutation that happened or an adaptation that happened. Nature favored it. They reproduced over time. And guess what? Then we have completely weeded out the green shell because it just didn't work. It didn't survive as well. But the brown shells were surviving and reproducing and growing their numbers. Good. How are we feeling? Are you tracking with me? I feel like if you start with a good base, like our redfish, greenfish, and we build on it, it makes all of these things make a little more sense. And again, if you have like a sad face or a meh face, help give me questions that I can answer to help make that more clear for you. Sometimes to get you from a meh to a green face, it's going to be going back and listening to the recording. It's going to be drawing a picture. I would love it if you made your own diagram of redfish, greenfish, or of the snail, or of something completely different. Because when you do that, it's going to connect the dots in your brain for you. Does that make sense? You're going to take the information I give you, process it, and put out something else. That's a way that your brain literally connects the dots. All right? So that would be I love that it makes sense to you. Good. Let's look here. This is just another example. I'm going to skip this one because I feel like the pictures aren't as clear as the last one. Let's go down this quick check. I feel like we all feel good when we get through this. Let's see. Katie hasn't read yet. Katie, will you read this first question? Sounds good, Luna. If you're cool with still reading, Katie. Absolutely, Lizzie. Jonathan, would you like to read this first question? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you don't have a question. Or Katie, I thought you might have walked away. I didn't give you the mic. Hold on one second, Jonathan. I thought it. Katie, try going back out and coming back in, and I'll have you do number 2. It doesn't look like it's on. Like when you enter, you have to select it. Try that. So go out and come right back in. Jonathan, let's read this first one while we wait.
Which event occurs prior to speciation?
Good. Speciation.
Speciation. Organisms of different populations join together. Different species share the same space and populations divided. Major change of on Earth takes place.
Good. So what do you think? What happens before we start getting a new species? What is the prelude to that? What happens? Hold on one second, too. I want to make sure this is open. All right. Let me give you. Everybody's everywhere. So what is the tricky part of this question? Anybody have what is, we're spread across A, B, C, and D. No idea what the specifics are first. So what event occurs to a species? Is it the organisms are different joined together? Did we talk about that? I mean, kind of, not really. Is it different species shared the same space? Is it a population is divided? Or is it a major change on Earth takes place? You see what I'm, okay, I want you to weed it down to 2. What's the first one we would have to maybe eliminate? I want you to tell me what you think you would eliminate, because this is what I would do if I didn't know the answer on a test. A or B? All right, organisms of different populations joined together, different species share the same space. I would agree with that, because we don't necessarily talk about what's there when they come to that environment. We're talking about a specific or particular population, right? So I get that. So what do we get down to? What do we get down to at this point? C and D. A population is divided or a major change on Earth takes place. I think this is tricky. I think this is a tricky one, and that's why we're doing
D.
this. Right.
I would eliminate D.
You would eliminate D. I like that idea, Jonathan, because we were talking about like the fishing instance with the redfish, greenfish. We were talking about the earthquake. Those things happen, and that is true. But what happens to the population because of that change is going to be population divided. Okay, does that make sense? It's going to be C. A population is divided because it's what is happening to the population versus what is I know what you were thinking. What were you thinking, D, Lizzie?
Yeah. Darn it. Yeah. Looking at the question, which event occurs prior to selection? Okay, selection is the separation, so the dividing of the population. Prior means before, so that's why I was thinking D, because a major has to take place before separation and that stuff can happen.
Sure.
So that's why I was thinking D.
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't love this question. That's why I'm going over them with you. These are not questions that I write. Okay. But these are questions that we do across the biology department. But that's what I'm going over with you, because to me, in my chronological brain, right, they wouldn't begin the speciation process if that event didn't take place, right? If there wasn't that big change, if it wasn't the natural disaster or the fishing instance, which is a natural disaster to a fish, right? If that didn't happen, then we wouldn't be going down that pathway. I 100% agree with that for the quiz. You're going to want to answer a population divided, because that is what they did. So that's what starts it, is the Earth. But what happens to the population is because of that, they are divided. But you are 100% right. That's the reason they are divided. And that would be like the chronological order of what happened first. That had to happen. The division had to happen, or the event had to happen to divide them. 100%. So don't feel like you're crazy if you answer D. It's a really tricky question on which one would be. And that's kind of why I was leading us down the path of, let's pretend this is on our end of course test. and we're like, this doesn't make sense. I think those I would be doing this in my head. I'd be like, well, this has to happen before the population is divided, but which one is it? In my brain, it's like, all right, let's get rid of the ones I know that it's probably not. And now I'm going to go through the debate of which one, and then you're going to make the best decision you can, right? Because there inevitably will be some not awesome questions. All right. Sorry, let's keep going. Which statements must be true of their individuals if two populations are no longer the same species? All right, we used to be the same, and now things have happened and they are not. What of these have to be true? They do not have the same genes. They do not share the same space. They do not resemble each other at all. Or they cannot reproduce successfully with each other. How do we know that things are now a completely different species, not just a completely different variety? They become a whole different species. Whole different species. What do you think? Yes, D. The answer is D. And the reason is some of those are true in A, B, C, and D, as where they may share some of the same genes. They may occupy some of the same spaces. They may or may not resemble each other. But one way we know they're no longer the same species is their reproduction doesn't happen. They can no longer reproduce. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm trying to rush and get you these. Sorry, let's do this one really quick before you go. How does speciation start to take place on a genetic level between two isolated populations? Read those to yourself, answer. I'm going to give you a minute, and then we're going to answer that together. What do you think? Large number of mutations occur. Allele frequencies change in different ways. New genes are added to one group, or recessive alleles become dominant. All right, we're leaning towards in poll B and C. So everybody go look at B and C, and I want you to choose the best what you think is the best answer. That's where everybody's leaning. Well, not everybody, but that's where the majority of you are leaning at in the polls. What do you think? How do we know? Shh, Mila. What do you think? Yep, we're leaning out of those. I would say it is B. The allele frequencies change in different ways, right? So that what was used to be no longer continues to make it is not the trend. Does that make sense? What used to be the trend is no longer the trend. Does that make sense? There used to be few or no greenfish, but after they were geographically isolated, that was favored. Does that make sense? They're favored now. It was like, so the allele frequency means the code for a gene, right? There's two, an A and a B for each gene. What that looks like outside expression, the phenotype is changing. I know it's a really hard way. It's not It kind of requires an explanation of that to feel it. And I understand. I don't love these questions, but that's why we review them, because I feel like you can leave class sometimes being like, yes, I get this. And then you read your quiz questions and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what just happened. All right. All right. We talked about species. Yes, you have to be able to reproduce, right? If you can't do that, you're not the same species. We talked about how species change over or times when they're geographically isolated, and they have to literally have those allele frequencies in the population shift, right? Where one used to be favored and now the other is favored, and it kind of weeds the other one out. And some examples of how populations get isolated, that was all the way at the beginning. We're talking about floods, we're talking about tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, all of those things, even fishing, right? It is a disaster for some fish. So what you're going to do today is take a quiz. It should be out. It should be ready for you. I would also encourage you to make those charts. I know. I'm sorry I went long today. I promise not to do it tomorrow. You have English? Don't be late. Thanks for being here today. Sorry for going long. And Lizzie, you had a question for me.
And I do. If you guys have testing, for February 26th for game design.
Jonathan, we'll see you there.
Okay. Can I have the screenshot for the quiz?